The Crow, called the Apsáalooke in their own Siouan language, or variants including Absaroka, are Native Americans, who in historical times lived in the Yellowstone River Valley, which extends from present-day Wyoming, through Montana and into North Dakota, where it joins the Missouri River. Today, they are enrolled in the federally recognized Crow Tribe of Montana.Pressured by the Ojibwe and Cree peoples, who had earlier and better access to guns through the fur trade. They had migrated from the Ohio Eastern Woodland area to settle south of Lake Winnipeg, Canada. For that, they were pushed to the west by the Cheyennes. Both the Crow and the Cheyennes were then pushed farther west by the Lakota, who took over the territory from the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Bighorn Mountains of Montana. The Cheyennes finally became close allies of the Sioux, but the Crows remained bitter enemies of both Sioux and Cheyennes. The Crow were generally friendly with the whites and managed to retain a large reservation of over 9,300 square kilometers despite territorial losses. Since the 19th century, Crow people have been concentrated on the reservation established south of Billings, Montana. They also live in several major, mainly western, cities. Tribal headquarters are located at Crow Agency, Montana. History. The name of the tribe, Apsáalooke, meaning children of the large-beaked bird, was given to them by the Hadatsa, a neighboring Siouan tribe. French interpreters translated the name as gens du corbeau, and they became known in English as the Crow. Other tribes also refer to the Apsáalooke as Crow or Raven in their own languages. In 1743, the Absaroka encountered the first people of European descent, the two La Vérendrye brothers from New France. The explorers called the Apsáalooke Boam. A Crow called the French explorers Bashchiel. In the northern plains, the early home of the Crow Hadatsa ancestral tribe was in the Ohio country, near Lake Erie. Driven from the by better armed, aggressive neighbors, they settled for a while south of Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. Later the people moved to the Devil's Lake region of North Dakota before the Crow split from the Hadatsa and moved westward. The Crow were largely pushed westward due to intrusion and influx of the Cheyenne and subsequently the Sioux. To acquire control of the new home, they warred against Shoshone bands and drove them westward. They allied with local Kiowa and Kiowa Apache bands. The Kiowa and Kiowa Apache bands later migrated southward, and the Crow remained dominant in their established area through the 18th and 19th centuries, the era of the fur trade. Their tribal territories stretched from what is now Yellowstone National Park and the headwaters of the Yellowstone River in the west, north to the Musselshell River, then northeast to the Yellowstone's mouth at the Missouri River, then southeast to the confluence of the Yellowstone and Powder Rivers, south along the South Fork of the Powder River, confined in the Shea by the Rattlesnake Mountains and westwards in the SW by the Wind River Range. Their tribal area included the river valleys of the Judith River, Powder River, Tongue River, Bighorn River and Wind River, as well as the Bighorn Mountains, Pryor Mountains, Wolf Mountains and Absaroka Range. Once established in the valley of the Yellowstone River and its tributaries on the northern plains in Montana and Wyoming, the Crow divided into four groups. The Mountain Crow, River Crow, kicked in the bellies and beaver dries its fur. Formerly semi-nomad hunters and farmers in the northeastern woodland, they picked up the nomadic lifestyle of the Plains Indians as hunters and gatherers and hunted bison. Before 1700, they were using dog travois for carrying goods. Enemies and allies. From about 1740, the Plains tribes rapidly adopted the horse, which allowed them to move out onto the plains and hunt buffalo more actively. However, the severe winters in the north kept the herds smaller than those of plains tribes in the south. The Crow, Hidatsa, Eastern Shoshone and Northern Shoshone soon became noted as horse breeders and dealers, and developed relatively large horse herds. At the time, other eastern and northern tribes were also moving on to the plains, in search of game for the fur trade, bison, and more horses. The Crow were subject to raids and horse thefts by horse-poor tribes, including the powerful Blackfoot Confederacy, Gros Ventre, Assiniboine, Pawnee, and Ute. Later they had to face the Lakota and their allies, the Arapaho and Cheyenne, who also stole horses from their enemies. The greatest enemies became the tribes of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Lakota Cheyenne or Arapaho alliance. The Crow were generally friendly with the northern plains tribes of the Flathead, Nez Perce, Kootenai, Shoshone, Kiowa and Kiowa Apache. The powerful Iron Confederacy, an alliance of northern plains Indian nations based around the fur trade, developed as enemies of the Crow. It was named after the dominating Plains Cree and Assiniboine peoples, and later included the Stoney, Sioux, Ojibwe, and Miakutis historical subgroups. The Apsáalooke by the early 19th century were divided into three independent groupings, who came together only for common defense: Apsáalooke, Waxahachie, Apsáalooke or Ashkual. The Apsáalooke, a mountain crow, the largest crow group, split from the Awatixe Hidatsa and were the first to travel west. Their leader Nointestans had received a vision and led his band on a long migratory search for sacred tobacco. Finally settling in southeastern Montana, they lived in the Rocky Mountains and foothills on the present-day Wyoming-Montana border along the upper Yellowstone River, in the Bighorn and Absaroka Range, with the Black Hills comprising the eastern edge of the territory. Binaasiapil, today called River Crow or Ashipiti, the Binaasiapil, or River Crow, split from the Hidatsa proper, according to tradition because of a dispute over a bison's stomach. As a result, the Hidatsa called the Crow Gixaaycca, those who pout over tribe. They lived along the Yellowstone and Musselshell rivers south of the Missouri River and in the river valleys of the Bighorn, Powder and Wind rivers, sometimes traveling north up to the Milk River, Elalapito or Amataleshe. They claimed the area known as the Bighorn Basin, from the Bighorn Mountains in the east to the Absaroka Range to the west, and south to the Wind River Range in northern Wyoming. Sometimes they settled in the Owl Creek Mountains, Bridger Mountains and along the Sweetwater River in the south. The oral tradition of the Apsáalooke mentions a fourth group, the Bilapaluach, who were believed to have merged with the Kiowa in the second half of the 18th century. Gradual displacement from tribal lands. When white Americans arrived in numbers, the Crows were resisting heavy pressure from enemies who greatly outnumbered them. In the 1850s, a vision by Planticus, a Crow boy who later became the greatest chief, was interpreted by tribal elders as meaning that the whites would become dominant over the entire country, and that the Crows, if they were to retain any of the land, would need to remain on good terms with the whites. By 1851 the more numerous Lakota and Cheyenne were established just to the south and east of Crow territory in Montana. These enemy tribes coveted the hunting lands of the Crow and warred against them. By right of conquest, they took over the eastern hunting lands of the Crow, including the Powder and Tongue River valleys, and pushed the less numerous Crow to the west and northwest upriver on the Yellowstone. After about 1860, the Lakota Sioux claimed all the former Crow lands from the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Bighorn Mountains of Montana. They demanded that the Americans deal with them regarding any intrusion into these areas. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 with the United States confirmed as Crow lands a large area centered on the Bighorn Mountains. The area ran from the Big Horn Basin on the west to the Musselshell River on the north, and east to the Powder River. It included the Tongue River Basin. But for 2 centuries the Cheyenne and many bands of Lakota Sioux had been steadily migrating westward across the plains, and were still pressing hard on the Crows. Red Cloud's War was a challenge by the Lakota Sioux to the United States military presence on the Bozeman Trail, a route along the eastern edge of the Big Horn Mountains to the Montana goldfields. Red Cloud's War ended with victory for the Lakota Sioux. The Treaty of Fort Laramie with the United States confirmed the Lakota control over all the high plains from the Black Hills of the Dakotas, westward across the Powder River Basin to the crest of the Big Horn Mountains. Thereafter bands of Lakota Sioux led by Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse and others, along with the Northern Cheyenne allies, hunted and raided throughout the length and breadth of eastern Montana and northeastern Wyoming, which had been for a time ancestral Crow territory. On the 25th of June 1876, the Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne achieved a major victory over Army forces under Colonel George A. Custer at the Battle of the Little Big Horn. But the Great Sioux War ended in the defeat of the Sioux and the Cheyenne allies. Crow warriors enlisted with the U.S. Army for this war. The Sioux and allies were forced from eastern Montana and Wyoming. Some bands fled to Canada, while others suffered forced removal to distant reservations, primarily in present-day Montana and Nebraska west of the Missouri River. In 1918, the Crow organized a gathering to display their culture, and they invited members of other tribes. A Crow Fair is now celebrated yearly on the third weekend of August with wide participation from other tribes. Culture. Subsistence. The main food source for the Crow was the American bison, which was hunted in a variety of ways. Before the use of horses, the bison were hunted on foot and required hunters to store close to the bison, often with a wolf pelt disguise, then pursue the animals quickly on foot before killing them with arrows or lances. The horse allowed the Crow to hunt bison more easily as well as hunt more at one time. Riders would panic the herd into a stampede and shoot the targeted animals with arrows or bullets from horseback to lance them through the heart. In addition to bison, the Crow also hunted bighorn sheep, mountain goats, deer, elk, bear, and other game. Buffalo meat was often roasted or boiled in a stew with prairie turnips. The rump, tongue, liver, heart, and kidneys all were considered delicacies. Dried bison meat was ground with fat and berries to make pemmican. In addition to meat, wild edibles were gathered and eaten such as elderberries, wild turnip, and Saskatoon berries. A Crow often hunted bison by utilizing buffalo jumps, where buffaloes are driven over cliffs at Long Ridge, was a favorite spot for meat procurement by the Crow Indians for over a century. From 1700 to around 1870, when modern weapons were introduced, the Crow used this place annually in the autumn, a place of multiple cliffs along a ridge that eventually sloped to the creek. Early in the morning, the day of the jump, a medicine man would stand on the edge of the upper cliff, facing up the ridge. He would take a pair of bison hindquarters and, pointing the feet along the lines of stones, he would sing his sacred songs and call upon the Great Spirit to make the operation a success. After this invocation, the medicine man would give the two head drivers a pouch of incense. As the two head drivers and the helpers headed up the ridge and the long line of stones, they would stop and burn incense on the ground, repeating this process 4 times. The ritual was intended to make the animals come to the line where the incense was burned, then bolt back to the ridge area. Habitation and transportation. The traditional traditional Crow shelter is the teepee, a skin lodge made with bison hides stretched over wooden poles. A Crow is historically known to construct some of the largest teepees. Teepee poles were harvested from the lodgepole pine, which acquired its name from its use as support for teepees. Inside the teepee, mattresses and buffalo hide seats were arranged around the edge, with a fireplace in the center. The smoke from the fire escaped through a hole, a smoke flap in the top of the teepee. At least one entrance hole with collapsible flap allowed entry into the teepee. Often hide paintings adorned the outside and inside of teepees with specific meanings attached to the images. Often specific teepee designs were unique to the individual owner, family, or society that resided in the teepee. Teepees are easily raised and collapsed and are lightweight, which is ideal for nomadic people like the Crow who move frequently and quickly. Once collapsed, the teepee poles are used to create a travois. Travois are a horse-pulled frame structure used by Plains Indians to carry and pull belongings as well as small children. Many Crow families still own and use the teepee, especially when traveling. The annual Crow Fair has been described as the largest gathering of teepees in the world. The most widely used form of transportation used by the Crow was the horse. Horses were acquired through raiding and trading with other Plains nations. People of the northern plains like the Crow mostly got the horses from people from the southern plains such as the Comanche and Kiowa, who originally got the horses from the Spanish and southwestern Indians such as the various Pueblo people. The Crow had large horse herds which were among the largest owned by Plains Indians. In 1914, they had approximately 30 to 40,000 head. By 1921, the number of mounts had dwindled to just 1,000. Like other Plains people, the horse was central to the Crow economy and were a highly valuable trade item and were frequently stolen from other tribes to gain wealth and prestige as a warrior. The horse allowed the Crow to become powerful and skilled mounted warriors, being able to perform daring maneuvers during battle, including hanging underneath a galloping horse and shooting arrows by holding onto its mane. They also had many dogs. One source counted 500 to 600. Dogs were used as guards and pack animals to carry belongings and pull travois. The introduction of horses into Crow society allowed them to pull heavier loads faster, greatly reducing the number of dogs used as pack animals. Clothing and beadwork. The Crow wore clothing distinguished by gender. Women wore dresses made of deer and buffalo skins, decorated with elk teeth as shells. They covered their legs with leggings during winter and the feet with moccasins. Crow women wore the hair in two braids. Male clothing usually consisted of a shirt, trimmed leggings with a belt, a long breechcloth, and moccasins. Robes made from the furred hide of a bison were often worn in winter. Leggings were either made of animal hide, which the Crow made for themselves, or made of wool, which were highly valued trade items made specifically for Indians in Europe. The hair was worn long, in some cases reaching the ground. A Crow are famous for often wearing the hair into a pompadour, which is often colored white with paint. Crow men were notable for wearing two hair pipes made from beads on both sides of the hair. Men often wore the hair in two braids wrapped in the fur from beavers or otters. Bear grease is used to give shine to hair. Stuffed birds were often worn in the hair of warriors and medicine men. Like other Plains Indians, the Crow wear feathers from eagles, crows, owls, and other birds in the hair for symbolic reasons. The Crow wear a variety of headdresses, including the famous eagle feather headdress, bison scalp headdress with horns and beaded rim, and split horn headdress. The split horn headdress is made from a single bison horn split in half and polished into two nearly identical horns which are attached to a leather cap and decorated with feathers and beadwork. Traditional clothing worn by the Crow is still worn today with varying degrees of regularity. The Crow people are well known for their intercut beadwork. They adorned basically every aspect of their lives with these beads, giving special attention to ceremonial and ornamental items. The clothing, horses, cradles, ornamental and ceremonial gear, in addition to leather cases of all shapes, sizes and uses, were decorated in beadwork. They gave reverence to the animals they ate by using as much of it as they could. The leather for their clothing, robes and pouches were created from the skin of buffalo, deer, and elk. The work was done by the tribe's women, with some being considered experts and were often sought by the younger, less experienced women for design and symbolic advice. A Crow are an innovative people and are credited with developing their own style of stitch work for adhering beads. This stitch, which is contemporarily called the overlay, is even still also known as the crow stitch. In the beadwork, geometric shapes were primarily used, with triangles, diamonds and hourglass structures being the most prevalent. A wide range of colors were utilized by the Crow, but blues and various shades of pink were the most dominantly used. To intensify or to draw out a certain color or shape, they would surround that figure or color in a white outline. The colors chosen were not just merely used to be aesthetically pleasing, but rather had a deeper symbolic meaning. Pinks represented the various shades of the rising sun, with yellow being the east, the origin of the sun's arrival. Blues are symbolic of the sky. Red represented the setting sun of the west. Green symbolizing Mother Earth. Black the slaying of an enemy, and white representing clouds, rain or sleet. Although most colors had a common symbolism, each piece's symbolic significance was fairly subjective to its creator, especially when in reference to the individual shapes. One person's triangle might symbolize a teepee, a spearhead to a different individual, or a range of mountains to yet another. Regardless of the individual significance of each piece, the Crow people give reverence to the land and sky with the symbolic references found in the various colors and shapes found on their ornamental gear and even clothing. Some of the clothing that the Crow people decorated with beads included robes, vests, pants, shirts, moccasins, and various forms of celebratory and ceremonial gear. In addition to creating a connection with the land from which they are a part, the various shapes and colors reflected one's standing and achievements. For example, if a warrior were to slay, wound, or disarm an enemy, he would return with a blackened face. The black color would then be incorporated in the clothing of that man, most likely in his war attire. A beaded robe, which was often given to a bride-to-be, could take over a year to produce and was usually created by the bride's mother-in-law or another female relative-in-law. These robes were often characterized by a series of parallel horizontal lines, usually consisting of light blue. The lines represented the young woman's new role as a wife and mother. Also, the new bride was encouraged to wear the robe at the next ceremonial gathering to symbolize her addition and welcoming to a new family. In modern times, the Crow still often decorate their clothing with intricate bead designs for powwow and everyday clothing. Gender and kinship system. A Crow had a matrilineal system. After marriage, the couple was matrilocal. Women held a significant role within the tribe. Crow kinship is a system used to describe and define family members, identified by Lewis Henry Morgan in his 1871 work Systems of Consanguinity and Affinity of the Human Family. A Crow system is one of the 6 major types which he described: Eskimo, Hawaiian, Iroquois, Crow, Omaha, and Sudanese. Like other Plains tribes, the Crow historically had 3 defined gender roles: male, female, and Bate. Oshdish was a well-known Crow Bate.